August 9, 2015. It was a warm summer Sunday morning in downtown Toronto, one of those hazy days when the city feels unusually quiet for a major metropolis. While most people were either sleeping in or grabbing their first coffee, 27-year-old Kabil Kadir pulled up to a well-known luxury hotel in the heart of the city. That hotel, usually a hub of tourists, nightlife, business travelers, would soon become the scene of a shocking and brazen killing that rippled far beyond the downtown core. What happened in the next few moments sparked a massive multi-year investigation, drew in witnesses from a neighborhood long marked by tension with law enforcement, and ultimately ended with two men standing trial for the killing. This is the story of the murder of Kabil Kadir, the hunt for his killers, and how an Etobicoke community, often labeled and misunderstood, played a crucial role in solving the case. To understand why Kabil was targeted, you have to go all the way back to 2009. Mohamud Abdiwali Dirie, known on the streets as Monopoly, and his brother brutally beat Kabil Kadir. It wasn't a random fight. It was personal, and it left a deep fracture in their social circle. Dirie believed Kabil had snitched on him, providing police with information that contributed to Dirie landing behind bars. Whether that accusation was true or not, Dirie believed it wholeheartedly. And in certain circles, being labeled a snitch is a death sentence. From that moment on, Dirie carried a grudge, a bitter resentment that didn't fade with time. It simmered, it hardened, and it became something dangerous. For 6 long years, that anger burned underneath the surface. Friends noticed the tension. People heard rumors. Some expected the conflict to eventually explode. They were right. Fast forward to 2015. On this warm summer Sunday morning, Kabil pulled up to that downtown Toronto hotel. The kind of hotel filled with businessmen, influencers, athletes, tourists, the kind of place where a shooting feels unthinkable. Kabil stepped out of the vehicle. He walked around to the back. He opened the trunk. He likely had no idea that someone who hated him, someone who had spent years nursing a violent grudge, was already nearby. In a matter of seconds, the gunman approached. Shots rang out. Kabil collapsed beside the open trunk. Hotel guests dove for cover. Valets ran inside. Surveillance cameras captured chaotic flashes of movement. The shooter, believed to be Dirie, fled instantly. Waiting for him nearby was the driver, Ayub Ali. The murder was fast, clean, and deliberate. This wasn't spontaneous violence. This was a planned execution 6 years in the making. From the minute the call came in, Toronto police understood they were dealing with something more than a random street killing. The location, Bay Street near Dundas, was packed with surveillance cameras and high pedestrian traffic. Investigators say the homicide unit obtained a great deal of video. They identified a key detail. A rented blue Hyundai Elantra had appeared on footage, arriving at the scene and then fleeing southbound on Bay Street shortly after the shooting. While detectives pieced together timing, footage, and car movements, they hit early challenges. The shooters didn't stick around. Witnesses were frightened. Some were uncertain exactly what they saw. The downtown setting complicated things. Lights, motion, multiple vehicles, and the fact that the victim was with friends who initially declined to come forward. The breakthrough in the case came from somewhere almost no one expected: the Dixon Road community in Etobicoke. At first glance, the connection might seem strange. The killing happened downtown, steps away from one of Toronto's busiest upscale hotels, far from the cluster of apartment towers that define Dixon Road. But to investigators, that neighborhood had long been a focal point. For years, police had been trying, often with difficulty, to establish real relationships within the community. Dixon is home to a large Somali-Canadian population, and it has faced a heavy burden of media scrutiny, socioeconomic challenges, and a long history of mistrust between residents and law enforcement. Police would knock on doors and get silence. They'd patrol the area and receive lingering stares. It was a place where information typically stayed inside the community, passed quietly from person to person, rarely leaving the walls of the neighborhood. But this case was different. As detectives canvassed for leads, people in Dixon Road began to talk. First in whispers, small details, bits of information, vague recollections. Then, gradually, with more certainty. Residents recognized the vehicle involved in the murder. They knew who had access to that blue Hyundai Elantra and who typically rode in it. Some knew of the long history between Kabil and Dirie, a conflict that had simmered beneath the surface for years. Others had heard rumors. The old beating in 2009, the lingering accusation of snitching, the quiet resentment that had become something toxic. Over time, those rumors gained structure. What people said began to line up with what investigators were already seeing in the evidence. This was not the kind of cooperation police were accustomed to receiving from Dixon Road. In fact, it was one of the few times in recent memory where community members not only offered information privately but were also willing to testify publicly. Detectives later said that this level of cooperation was significant, even remarkable, given the history between the neighborhood and the justice system. Police would go on to credit the community's involvement as a turning point, something without which the case might have stalled or collapsed entirely. Witnesses who came forward took real risks, but their statements, testimonies, and willingness to identify individuals tied the narrative together in a way no physical evidence could accomplish alone. As detectives pieced together those witness accounts with video footage, forensic findings, and communication data, two names kept resurfacing like a pattern they could no longer ignore: Mohamud Abdiwali Dirie and Ayub Hirsi Ali. The Crown's framing of the case would eventually paint a clear picture. Dirie was the shooter, the man who had carried a 6-year-old Grudge, the one seen on surveillance approaching the trunk of Kabil's car. Ali, meanwhile, was the facilitator. He wasn't just the getaway driver. Prosecutors argued he played an essential role in orchestrating the timing, bringing Dirie to the scene, circling the block, and positioning the Elantra to escape within seconds. It was, according to the Crown, a coordinated operation, deliberate and fully intentional. The motive now stood out with clinical clarity. What began in 2009 as a brutal beating had metastasized into a vendetta. Dirie's belief that Kabil had snitched on him was never resolved, never confronted directly, never allowed to dissipate. Instead, it hardened over time, embedding itself into the lives of everyone around them. Detectives said the Grudge provided the emotional fuel that explained the planning and execution of the murder. By 2018, the trial finally moved forward, drawing intense interest from both the community and the broader city. Throughout the proceedings, dozens of witnesses took the stand, some connected to the downtown hotel where the shooting happened, others from bars and clubs visited earlier that night, but many came directly from the Dixon Road towers. Their testimonies provided context that stretched far beyond a single act of violence. They spoke of tension, whispered conflicts, and long-standing feuds. They described the social circles, the relationships, the complicated web of loyalty and resentment that tied the men together. Prosecutors relied heavily on this testimony to illustrate motive, opportunity, and premeditation. The physical evidence presented in court was equally compelling. Surveillance stills captured the blue Elantra making its way downtown in the early morning hours, circling the area, and positioning itself just before the murder. Phone records showed a flurry of communication between Dirie and Ali, evidence the Crown said represented careful coordination. Forensic analysts broke down timing windows, travel paths, and behavioral patterns leading up to the moment Kabil opened the trunk of his car. Each piece added weight to the narrative of planning rather than spontaneity. The prosecution methodically walked the jury through the entire timeline, from the beating in 2009 to the rising tension in the years that followed, from the accusation of snitching to the late-night drive downtown, from the pickup of the Elantra to the club where the suspects were last seen, from the movement toward the hotel to the sharp U-turn caught on camera moments before the killing. This structure was intentional. The Crown wanted jurors to see this not as a random shooting, but as a methodical, calculated act shaped by 6 years of animosity. The defense countered aggressively. They questioned the reliability of witnesses from Dixon Road, arguing that rumors, conflicts, and street gossip could easily distort people's memories. They scrutinized the surveillance footage, suggesting that grainy images and angles may have led investigators to draw conclusions that weren't as clear as they appeared. They attempted to distance Ali from Dirie's intentions, claiming there was no evidence that Ali knew a murder would unfold that morning. The defense argued that, at most, Ali was guilty of being present, not complicit. But despite these challenges, the weight of the cumulative evidence, paired with the rare and powerful cooperation of the Dixon Road community, ultimately shaped the outcome. The Crown's narrative held together with enough strength that the jury believed it. The community voices, once overlooked, became central to revealing the truth behind the execution-style killing of Kabil Abdulkhadir. After deliberation, the jury delivered its verdicts. Mohamud Dirie was found guilty of first-degree murder, meaning the jury concluded the killing was both planned and deliberate. The sentence for first-degree murder in Canada is life in prison with no eligibility for parole for 25 years. For Ayub Ali, the jury found him guilty of manslaughter, indicating that while his role was recognized, the jury was not convinced he shared the shooter's intent to kill. Both men were slated for sentencing on September 4th. For Kabil's family, the verdicts brought the end of years of uncertainty and an acknowledgement of their loved one's life, tragically cut short.